Hi, I'm here.
Hello. Hi there.
Hi.
Hello. I'd like to welcome all of you. I'm looking at the chat. You're from all over the world. This is very exciting. Welcome to our photography lecture today with Todd Hido. My name is Janie Welker. I'm the curator at the University of Kentucky Art Museum here in Lexington. For those of you in the region, the museum is open Tuesday through Friday with COVID safety protocols in place. You can register on our website for an appointment to visit. For those of you who are nowhere near here, a warm virtual welcome to the Bluegrass region, home to thoroughbreds and bourbon, and here at the university, a very great love of photography. A practical note, for those of you on Zoom, we will have the Q&A chat open during the talk. So please put in questions on the Q&A as they occur to you. At the end of Todd's talk, we will read as many as possible in the time frame. Also, if you see questions that echo what you're thinking, you can upvote that. So we'll know if a question gets more than one vote, that's one that we should look at. Right. So I'm just going to dispense with any pretense of being a cool observer of Todd Hido's work. I've followed his photography for years, entranced by the evocative images he captured while driving through neighborhoods at night, photographing homes whose glowing windows reveal little but suggest untold stories. For more than 25 years, Todd returned literally and metaphorically to memories and experiences of growing up in Kent, Ohio, exploring suburban isolation, but also finding romance and mystery in the mundane. His 8 monographs, which allow him to juxtapose his own photographs and sometimes found images to create subtexts that operate at a level beyond words, are a lesson in bookmaking. Of course, his work is in major collections around the country and around the world, and his work has been shown in exhibitions around the world. When I began looking at recent work, which takes a more global path, it seemed to be the perfect juncture to invite him to speak. A darkly divisive political atmosphere here at home, along with increasingly frightening manifestations of climate change around the world, spurred Todd to travel widely before COVID made that impossible. He went to Scandinavia, Iceland, Japan, Alaska, and beyond. He examines a world seemingly on the edge of apocalypse, dominated by lowering skies and eerie light. But at the same time, he was working simultaneously on portraits, as he always has, austere and beautifully lit. They seem to me a validation of light and humanity, as well as traditions in art and photography. I welcome him here to speak about his work past, present, and future. Todd, I'm just going to turn this over to you now. Thanks for being here.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, okay, excellent. All right, well, thank you very much for inviting me. And I have to say, Janie, I get a lot of emails about doing things, but the words that you said to me about my work and the way you've talked about my work are really moving to me, and I really appreciate your thinking on it. So thank you, and also to everybody, thank you for doing this. It's still a learning curve of doing these things like on a computer, but I'll try to make it be like we're all in the same room as much as I can. So I'm going to get rid of my face and put my pictures up here. And then actually I have to tab over, or actually I'm just gonna talk. And actually it's better if I don't see my face. I think that's good. Okay. All right. So anyway, sorry about that. All right. So welcome to this talk. And hold on one second. Sorry. We need to put one thing in front of the other. Excuse me. This is Laura, my assistant, who is incredibly awesome.
Okay, this one. Right?
That one.
Yep.
Ah, we forgot to share the screen. Okay, now I get it. Okay. We practiced this 10 minutes ago, but of course. All right, now go to full screen and welcome to my lecture. Okay. It's so weird, just like usually the audience feedback is instant, but I'll just pretend that you're smiling. All right, so let's talk about my work. I basically, I'm going to give you do a slideshow that I've done for much of my career, and actually started way back at the Boston Museum School in this class that one of my favorite teachers of all time, Virginia Bean, was the teacher of, and it was called Sources, Kinships, and Influences. And it was a class where we were basically like, we were supposed to, dig deep inside of ourselves and discover where our work came from. And I really have to say that kind of profound, like, digging and truth in the very beginning of my career, I've always just sort of stuck with that, because I think that, like, there's a generosity in sharing, like what you look at, not only sharing your work, but like everybody is influenced by something. And then also some of those things aren't always images, actually they're often other things that influence us. And we're not even talking about movies or something like that. We're talking about just life. So anyhow, it's kind of important. And so early on, I did this dive. And then, and it's sort of, and I'll just and I've been building this slideshow for, gosh, since 1989, when I went to the museum school. So basically, this is, one day I looked at a Google map, and I love looking at satellite views of things. It's very fascinating. Sometimes I plan where I'm going to go and what I'm going to look at and all that, as much as I can, but not crazily. But anyhow, so I grew up on Denise Drive, and then I looked at this map, and I was like, wow, all the things in my work are sort of like on this map, at one end of this, like it's not in the satellite view, but like there's cornfields at the one end of this street, and then there's woods at the rest, at the other part of it surrounding it. And so I kind of grew up in these like this brand new suburbs built in the 70s in the middle of cornfields that wasn't far from Kent State University. So that's kind of like my environment. And then my mom would always tell us, like, you can do anything, but just don't go to the apartments, which is where we would go all the time, of course. And I still have an affinity for photographing those places. And I'll try to remember showing you an apartment that actually is in this neighborhood when we get there. But so that's where I grew up. And then, as you can see, the hipsters copped my look and whatnot. But this is one of my first pictures that I like remember taking. And I don't know, it's funny how, but old pictures trigger memories. So like, do you remember the event or you remember the picture? But anyway, that's a big discussion. But this is one of those things that was floating around in some junk drawer of ours. And I remember, and then, like when I was an adult, I went back and I got that stuff out of that junk drawer, and I was looking at all these pictures, and they're just endlessly fascinating, of course. And this is a picture that I took of my little toy horse with the Tonto figure on it from like the Lone Ranger. And we hadn't just moved into this house. It was just we just didn't have the furniture to fill it at that point. So that's my living room when I was about 10. And then what really got me sort of hooked on photography, though, was BMX racing. It's something that I did. I always rode my bike, but like I was obsessed with it, and I was actually the state champion of Ohio 4 times in my teenage years. And so that's me. But that got me, just like any kid any kid with an iPhone and a skateboard these days, like you want to record what it is you're doing that's fun, and you want to share it with your friends. And so that's how I picked up a camera at first, just like to photograph my friends, doing stuff like I'm doing in this picture. This isn't particularly all that awesome, but I tell you, I was very fast. Okay, so let's jump forward a whole bunch to going to I'll give you just a tiny bit of backstory, because I want to keep this at an agreeable time frame. I grew up in Kent. I started photography in high school. I went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh for a couple of years and learned about photography, because that's all that it was BMX or photography, and that's all I was interested in. And thankfully I found photography, and it's honestly like, once you catch that bug of photography, like it's literally shaped my entire life, and it shapes my days, to this point. And it's, something that I love, and I feel lucky that I've, been able to do this for my life. And I'm, I'm on part 2, but like, that's the midway point. And basically, so and then I went off, and then I eventually went to the Boston Museum School and studied there. And then I ended up going to graduate school at the California of Arts and Crafts in San Francisco. And that is where I met Larry Sultan. And that is where I had an assignment for this really amazing class that he taught called the Narrative Workshop. And it was with a filmmaker named Lynn Kirby. And we basically, like our job was just to make narratives out of pictures. Photographers, like I wanted to use photographs. And that's one thing that I really love photography, and I love just what photographs do and don't do. I'll explain that a little bit more later, but like photography was my choice. And so I would make these narratives, and I collected these found photographs, but of people, but I needed a place for them to exist within my narrative. And just like on every, sitcom, when they come back from a commercial, they flash on a house at night, and then they go inside. And so basically, like my images are, there's something about that, like very simplistic, like placing of the narrative that they emanate from. And then the thing that I like about photography is a picture tells you a ton of things, but it doesn't tell you everything, of course. And that's where the imagination of the viewer comes in, which I really enjoy. So that's how I made this first picture of House at Night. And then I kind of moved on to the next thing, whatever that was. I was experimenting a lot in grad school. And then, but then I came across another house that I liked. And then I photographed that. And then, I had a couple, and I was like, looking at these, and they were interesting, and I set out to do more. And then I luckily found this neighborhood that was about 20 minutes from where I lived in San Francisco. That was a Levittown style neighborhood, but it was in Pacifica, California, and it was just the weirdest place because it was up on the top of a hill near the coast, but that equals foggy and creepy and looking like this at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the summertime. And so that was just a perfect find for me, like to find a place that looked like everywhere or anywhere USA. But it had this, it was shrouded in fog half of the year. And I would just go there and take pictures. And then how I got started with night photography was I just sort of stumbled upon it. I had been out shooting, and I sort of just remembered, reciprocity failure assignment, that like, if you expose it for a really long time, it'll just work. And like, that's how photography with using a negative works. So I just sort of, kept going, obviously refined it all, but that's where I started doing it. It was sort of like something I just happened, and I didn't really, it wasn't, I don't usually have an idea that comes to me first and then go and execute it. I usually find out what I'm, interested in and thinking about through looking at the pictures that I make, and that's what writers say. I think it was Joan Didion that says, if like, I'm not quoting this properly, but if you look at like what you're writing about is what you're thinking about. Maybe that's a simplification. But that's what I believe is true. And that's how I work too. And then I also, at the same time, I always am doing different things, as Janie mentioned in the beginning, that, I photograph interiors, I photograph, outside at night, I photograph portraits, and I'll do all this kind of like, sometimes in the same trip or same couple of days or whatever. I seem to have shootings like I seem to go out in waves to take pictures. I like make the time to do it. And this was on a trip back home for Christmas when I was in grad school. This is my bed as a boy at my parents' house. And And then this is the television that corrupted me as a teenager in Ohio. And those are my BMX trophies on top. Those are just a few of them. And so this is also my homage to Hiroshi Sugimoto's theater pictures. But anyway, so I photograph like a documentarian, but I print like a painter. So what does that mean when I say that? Well, what that means is that when I'm making these pictures, I don't, go up to the house and say, hey, will you turn the lights on? I really, would want to take a picture of your house. Or I don't even let people know that I'm doing it. I'm always staying on public property. And I'm very, I never, ever go on anybody's property. And I also do things with, I don't sneak around. I don't, if you feel suspicious, you look suspicious. And if you feel confident, you look confident, and it looks like you're supposed to be doing what you're doing. And you would be surprised at what a dose of confidence does. And I know that, of course, like, how do I get that in the beginning? It's like, well, you just have to figure that out. But you can, confidence is like it's an amazing little ticket in photography that sometimes helps. So remember me telling you, like, just go do it if you want to. And don't worry about it, just do it. So basically, so that's what I would do. And I would just, and so I wouldn't say like, move this van to the left, or could you move that minivan? I don't like it there. I just sort of work with what I find. And then, but that's like, I always say that there's like three parts. There's three stages to making a good picture. It's like, you got to find what you're going to photograph and photograph it. And then how do you print that photograph is the other part. And there's a million ways to do it. And then how do you present that photograph? And that's the third part that's important. And I'll be showing you some installation shots throughout this talk. But anyhow, but when it comes to like, printing, like what I talk about when I say like I print like a painter, is like, I don't feel married to like reality in the sense of like faithfully matching what was there. I'm more interested in creating a mood that that resonates with me. And so that's kind of how that goes. So I spend time, doing standard things like burning, dodging, and changing the color and lightening and darkening and stuff like that. That's kind of, those are my things. I don't even know how to lasso something or cut and paste a part of a picture. I can spot, but that's about it. So then one of the things that happens when you start, doing something, you go out and then you kind of figure out, well, what's this about? What is it about? And then I started to like think like, well, like this picture struck me, and it became something meaningful for me, is that, I would wonder, like, this is back before everybody had a screen in their hands and in their room and like, whatever. But this is like, I think it was made in like 1994. And this is two people watching television in separate rooms of the house with the lights out after dark. And so, and I always, when I saw that, I was like, that's weird. It's like, why aren't they sitting together, is what I would say to myself. And so what that starts to talk about is what's happening in that house, and what are the relationships of the people like in that house. And that is what I'm interested in. That is what I'm curious about, is like home and family and stories and memory and whatnot. So those are the things that I am thinking about when I'm out there. There's me taking pictures, and then there's what I do when I'm done. No, just kidding. The rear window picture is Hitchcock, of course. And people would say my work is voyeuristic, but it's actually not voyeuristic. You don't see anything at all in the houses. They're always, it's just a curtain, with light. And then sometimes maybe there's a shadow of a lamp, but other than that, there's no visibility inside any place. And then the other person on the right is Mary Alpern, who had a book called Dirty Windows in the 90s. And then here's a picture that I sort of like, I got this Plow and Hearth catalog, and I was like, oh, that's kind of like what I do. And I was like, yeah, a little bit, but not really. But what's interesting about that is, and I like this because like these things, like things become conventions for a reason, because they work, like lights on in a house, invite the viewer in to the scene. you know, and I like that, you know, in this particular picture, it's like this toxic green, you know, light in there, which is very strange. I've never seen that anywhere else except that one house. And then also, if you look closely, like the, you know, somebody cut out like the bars on some of the windows, and that's kind of strange too. So it's interesting, like, you know, what's going on? And then, so here's one of the contact sheets, you know, and you can see, like, you know, when I also, like, you know, you have to be very, especially these days, you have to be incredibly careful when you're out at night taking pictures, so that you're not weirding anybody out or threatening, or people feel threatened or like whatnot. That's why, like, you know, being super obvious is super important. That's being obvious is the key to night photography. So that way nobody gives you a hard time. And so anyhow, I set up my tripod and I take a picture, and this is back when I would use film all the time. I used Kodak 400 Portra film, and with the Pentax 6x7 camera, and basically I would, you know, this is an exposure that is, you know, probably, this is a bright light that's about 6 minutes long, and so I would photograph, you know, a little bit, and then I'd move in a little closer, and then I got a little closer to the house, and then I found the right composition, and that's really all that I do when I'm shooting, so that's how that works. And then that ended up becoming the cover of my first book, House Hunting. And it's interesting how that works. Is like, I remember when I was taking pictures that night, I had I'd driven around for 5 hours and I found nothing, you know, at all that I was even interested in. And then I was getting ready to go home, and I turned the corner and I went down this one street to do a U-turn, and then there you go, I saw this image, and it was I immediately got out and made the picture. But it was, you know, that's what happens sometimes. It's like, sometimes, like, you know, things are great and you get a lot of pictures, and sometimes you barely get any, and sometimes you get one. And I always say, if I got one picture, you know, even if it was a 3-day trip, I'd be happy. And so in terms of presenting my work, that was the third component I talked about. You know, so when I was making this work, you know, definitely, you know, thinking about how am I going to show this work, and I do that with almost all my work. Whenever I'm making pictures, I'm kind of in the back of my head thinking about, well, what am I going to do with it? How am I going to show it? And those things develop as you go. But with this, I'm really interested in the like the ability. I like the ability to juxtapose things, and I like the idea of this as like a neighborhood. So these are all 20 by 24 prints in white frames, and they're all hung like 2 inches apart. And so there's a kind of like this seamless interruption from image to image because of the white frame. And so that's how I would present them. And then here's a great question. People always ask, how do you know when you're done with the body of work? And it's like, well, you're done with the body of work, I think, only when you kind of stop getting out and taking that picture, or stop, getting your camera out to take that picture. It's something that, like, this is something that, like that last one, this is 22 pictures, and it's, at a museum in the UK. And then this is at Pier 24. I forget what year this was, but it was many years before, after that other one. And there's 45 images here. And like, even though I had, 2 books out on this subject, I had 15 solo shows. Of course, I just kept making pictures of whatever it was that I'm interested in. And this is still calling me, and then to this day, I still make these pictures. But this is what 45 looks like, and not quitting after, you're done with a project. It's like, it's just like a lot for me. I think a lot of the things that I add, I'm adding to stacks of photographs when I'm out making pictures. And, I'm open to many different things, and I try not to get too focused on one particular thing at a time. And then we talked about kinships and things like that. So this is a photograph I had made in Pittsburgh once. And then I found this Edward Hopper slide, The Lonely House, which is wonderful. And I love that they're just, I didn't remember this Hopper picture, but there's a kinship between these two things. And then there's a young woman named Hannah Antons who was a high school student when there was an exhibition up in the Carolinas, and I believe it was North Carolina Museum of Art. And and she was sent there to, her teacher said, you guys should go draw something, in the museum, or draw from something. And this is the painting she made, and the curator there shared it with me. Because I love it. It's so remarkable. I love how people can, people take a little something from somebody and then they turn it into something else. And it's, or they're drawn together or whatever. There's something about that kinship that I really enjoy. And then another person that I really love his work, Robert Adams. He's been, a huge influence of mine ever since I first saw his work. And these are, I kind of I grew up in a neighborhood just like this when it was, like suburbs were, it was 30 years later from this, is when I started making my pictures. So there's something about this is brand new. These are brand new pictures of new houses and new developments, and there's not even any shrubs built, there. And then the things I photographed are kind of well, what happens when people live in a place for 30 years? And I like that. That's something that I feel I've taken from his work, and I've sort of jumped off on with that. And then Stephen Shore, I really enjoy what he does. And then Burnt and Hillebesher, I adore their work. And I always, and I really there's something about that, there's something about repetition in photography that is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of photography is repetition. There's the ability to, to make iterations that are slightly different upon a picture. I think I'm very curious about that. And then Ache, who's adds poetry to that obsession. And then, I've always just instantly was a fan of Ache's when I was introduced to his work. And then one thing that happens, sometimes these spontaneous things come about. I had signed up for a workshop when I was in college, and it was for a National Geographic photographer, and which would have been really exciting. But that person got an assignment, and they substituted somebody at the last minute, and somebody I didn't know at that moment was Roy DiCarava, which, obviously was wow, that's an incredible substitution. And I really enjoyed what he would have to say about his work. And he would always say, go make it darker. We would make prints together in the dark room, and, you'd come out to the light and he would be like, make it darker, make it darker. And that kind of stuck. But the story behind this picture, which I think is really important for me, is that, he made this picture. He was going to visit somebody, and he'd never been to their place before. And then he went up into the apartment, and he turned the corner, and he stopped dead in his tracks, and he ran back home to get his tripod so we could make this picture, because he said that it was just identical to him, to the hallway he would walk down as a child to his apartment. And I feel like there's something about that feeling of recognizing something that you've seen before, and wanting to capture that and explore that. And that's what I really do when I'm out driving around taking pictures. I always kind of end up gravitating back to some place. No matter where I am, I'll just find something that kind of reminds me of home, in a way. And then another photographer I love is Diane Arbus. I just love her unflinching, manner, and her just, her pictures are just straightforward and right in there. And I, am not afraid of that kind of sadness either. And then here's something I always say to my students, and, especially these days, can you imagine when we can get together and have a party and do this in one room again? It'll be really exciting. We should have a party when that can happen. But anyway, these are, there's a few people that I've, liked what they did, and they liked what I did. And we've made these relationships that have turned into, as we've grown up in photography, turned into, really solid friendships where, by just, telling somebody that you like what you did. Like my friend Darius Himes down here is, we used to have these book parties a while back after we come back from Paris Photo. And we never got to look at the books that each other got. So we're like, let's check them out when we get back. And then he said, well, let's invite more people. And I'm like, that's great. And so we would do this. And this is like the Bay Area photo crowd. And from the past, and several people have moved. But anyhow, it's it's a gathering that was based upon two people saying, "Hey, I like what you do," and they're like, "I like what you do too." And then Chris McCall, also, who's the curator of Pier 24, is just the dialogue and the relationship that you can have with people in an extended way is just really enriching, for curators and photographers. So anyway, I encourage that. And then one of the most important influences of in terms of a person would be Larry Sultan. He was my teacher in graduate school, and and he did a book called Pictures from Home, and he really just left an impact on me. He was one of the most articulate and thoughtful people I've ever met in my entire life. And I was really lucky to be able to work with him. And I think it was him that first, put it through my thick skull that if you're taking pictures of homes, you're taking pictures about your past and your home and your family. And then of course, that's exactly what it's about, And so it's, anyway, that was one thing that I really received from Larry. And then he also introduced me to the work of Raymond Carver. And then, big, huge circles come back around. And then, I'm very moved by Raymond Carver's work. And then luckily, when they were working on reissuing some of his books, they state in the, Penguin got together with me, and they asked me to work with them to get covers for them. And then Tess Gallagher was also involved, and it was really just an amazing experience to be able to have my images used for the cover of books that I, was very meaningful to me. And this is what we talk about when we talk about love. And it's like, yep, that's exactly what I was thinking about, and it's just kind of amazing how that sort of, those things come back and they just connect up at some point. This is one they didn't use, but I thought it would have been a good one, but nobody wants this ugly mattress on a cover of a book. So anyway, that's that. And then, and then one thing about the work I'm talking about, I'm basically going in kind of a sort of chronological order, but there's also like a parallel tracks always happening with me. So while I was shooting those houses, I also I learned that pictures of places could tell stories. And so I wanted to, naturally go inside of something, but I wasn't interested in going inside the houses that I was photographing. Like they're not the same places, they're disconnected. And then through the loveliness of juxtaposition and bookmaking and paper movies, it's like you're bringing these things together. And so here's just a house. And when I did this work, like a lot of it was in 1994, or 5, and it was, I used to have to explain what a foreclosed home was. I had to look that up myself the first time I heard it. And obviously I think we all know what that is right now. But there's something that's really different about going into a place. It's not just a place somebody moved out of. It's like there's something like occurred here, and it wasn't necessarily positive. And there's parts of that I find that are really compelling. And they're there in the pictures, but even if they're the most minute little thing, or even just the thing like where whoever lived in this house, like every time they walked out the door, they would close it with their fingers, and you can see it on the door jamb and the thing, and never cleaned it or never wiped it, so it's like, that's like the accumulation of like however many years of somebody going in and out of a door, which is kind of fascinating, I think. And then there's, and again, like in the other photographs of houses at night, these are not staged. Like I didn't set this up. This is like, you can always find things that are much more interesting than you can set up, I think, or at least for me, that's definitely the way that is. And then an influence of mine, Walker Evans, is a good juxtaposition with this. Like I really love his work. And then there's a picture of one of those. And so then just sort of like moving along, because there's a bunch of stuff I want to show you, is landscape. So I kind of had, when I would be out shooting, I would obviously, if I saw something like this, I would take a picture, even if it wasn't a house. So I started to accumulate these, and I started to, I would shoot other things when I was out. This is when I was out scouting, and then I remember I stopped at a stop sign, and then all this water and snow rushed over my windshield that was on my roof. And then I remember thinking, wow, that's interesting. And then I had my camera right next to me, and I took this picture, and then I moved on. And then when I got this back, it was kind of this discovery that, you'll see in a few minutes, it goes on to inform a lot of the things that I've done in the landscape. But that was a one-off at first. And then how I really got super focused on that was like, I remember I had a residency in Marseille, France. And it was sort of like, it was unfortunately like a weird time. It was October 2001. And that's, about 20 days after 9/11 happened. And it was just an odd time to go overseas. And I think we were starting a war, and it was just not, it wasn't the right time to be away. So it just didn't work out. But I spent my time in my studio there that they gave me, which was the first time I ever had like a place to really hang up pictures. Because, photography happens out in the world and then in a dark room. So having the luxury of a big wall to hang things up was something fun. And so I used my time there to sort of, look at my work. I often travel with these little tiny pictures with me so I can think about my work or I'll look at it. And so this is what I had put together. And those were my landscape pictures to date, that I thought were good. So then I just got back home, and then I just kept going. And then it was kind of the most focused I was, because I knew that I didn't want to do another book about houses at night. And I really wanted to be, because I wanted to do something, I wanted to not be like, stuck doing the same thing. I wanted to be, more diverse than that as a photographer. So I set out to do portraits. I mean, landscapes, and then or out in the world. And then here's where the shooting through the window comes in again. I had, remembered back to that. And then this is maybe the second one of those that I did that I thought worked. And then, I spent a lot of time just going around, but I'll show you more landscapes in a minute, because that sort of gets to that. But just to sort of see like where I work and what I look at and all that, like I'm a huge collector of photo books, and I have thousands of them, like 7,000 or something. And I remember I started doing it when I was 18, and because there was something about being able to take a book and have it at home and being able to look at it slowly, and like being able to leave pages open to certain pictures. And, that's something I still do to this day, is like, I'm like kind of think about a book over time. And I flip the pages and look at things, and sometimes put other people's pictures next to other people's pictures. But it's just interesting. But there's, this is like one of my offices, but it looks just like this now, or similar. And then here, just pictures all over. And then I have these little white frames here that are mini, like 8x10 versions of like what I hang on the wall for shows. And so I would, go to the dark room, and I would make these prints, and I would come home, and I'd want to put them in these frames just to have it be like finished. And then I would, they stand up on their own. So I would like have them right next to where I would work, and I would be looking at them, and this was constantly changing this area, and still does. But it's a way for you to sort of like, I always say that, like, if you wonder about a picture, if it is good or is it not good or what, if you set it, next to you, like when you're working on your computer, like all day, like you will know by lunchtime whether it's any good or not. And it usually gets it gets thrown out, or it gets even better. And that's what you hope for. But that's what I still do that. And then here's just some shots. I like to lay things out, and I sort of like to organize things, and I just randomly, sometimes move things around, or random things happen. But whenever something is interesting, I'll photograph a picture of it just to remember it. And then I'll just sort of play around and, is this good with this? Or is it like this better with this? And, just what people would do are do you need like a found photo, or do you need, somebody with a gun, or, do you need something different? And so, that one's not my picture. It's a printout from something, but it just and this the middle one's not mine either, but you can see it's just laying things out, making a paper movie, and then it sort of turns into this sort of narrative. And I'm really interested in narrative. And then this sort of brings me to this one installation that I had done at the in Mississippi, and it was at an SBE conference. And I remember they wanted to put up some of my work. It was in a group show with other people that were presenting in the conference. And I remember there wasn't a budget for shipping framed artwork. So, but I had this idea, and I was like, well, what if it was also about rule breaking. That was the theme of the conference. And it's like, well, what if we break all the rules, and I just take everything off my walls in my studio, roll it up and put it in a tube. And then your students and I will put it all back together on your walls for a show. And that's what we did. And that was actually one of my best ideas. We had such a great night that time. I remember it was really meaningful for me and the students. And it was also important for them to see that they could pick up my pictures and touch them and pin them on the wall. And, that they weren't these precious things. They were pictures on paper and whatnot. So I think that was really, it was just, there was a whole lot. And then we even made it to the last call. So that was good. And then in terms of and then I talked about going through, so I did houses at night, and I was interested in interiors. And then I sort of did some, another genre, landscape. And I was just kind of thinking about branching out with just evolution of your work. And I had done portraits of friends, but I'd never really done portraits of, I never really put all of my artistic energy into doing portraits. So I decided to sort of shift that direction a little bit after my third book. And then this actually was the man that taught me how to color print. His name is David Remington, and he told me 6 things. If it's too magenta, add magenta. If it's too yellow, add, oh my God, I can't remember. You add yellow and magenta, and then we'll tell you later. There's not enough time, but anyway. David Remington. So this is a portrait I'd made in graduate school. And then, and this is when I started to I liked blank background, and I wanted it to be simple. And then I had done some more portraits, and somebody had asked me at a magazine that I had worked for if I was interested in doing a fashion shoot to mix with my work, and I did, and the results were interesting. And then there was something about this picture that I thought was just, it was a little artificial or forced, and I actually liked the picture that I made the day before. There was a test shot when it was just myself and the model and my assistant. And there's something about the artifice that for my personal artwork, I prefer a very real reality of things. And that's what I'm curious about. I like, rooms that aren't perfect. I like nobody's perfect, of course. And so that's sort of, and then here's where playing with your pictures comes in. It's this could be the light, that's lighting this up. And so this was started to become a book called Between the Two. And these are the images that I made. And then some of the influences there are, Edward Hopper is somebody that I've really always just immediately just cling to his work. There's something that speaks to me very, very greatly and loudly in his work. And then Robert Frank as well. I love, of course, all the Americans, but I also love the work he did in Maboon, Nova Scotia. And this is, I love this piece. And then Belloc is somebody I really love his work from New Orleans. And then there's me. And then, so I would, put these interiors with these portraits and these places, and I started to kind of just build my narrative with that. And that's something that I was just doing. And that was, a book called Between the Two. And I think there was a real, I always had that impulse to combine things. And, but I also, photography, sometimes the repetition of it wants you to sort them into different piles and leave them there. But I think the real richness is in coming together with putting them, the combinations is where the richness really comes from. That's an installation shot. And then here's I showed you that contact sheet from the other one. This one, you can barely tell the difference, but that's the beauty of photographing people, is that every single picture is absolutely totally different. There's something about each one that is unique. And that's why that's why portraiture is so fascinating. This is how I light things, except I don't have a little assistant. I have a clamp that holds the curtain open. And this is a Boltus. But that light, is important to me. That's kind of like a little sliver of light in a window, is really what most of my portraits are made with, or one light bulb. That's one that's like that. And then sometimes bright is good. And then so I'm going to jump forward a few notches because I'm going to go through these. This is from A Road Divided. And I'm just going to keep moving quickly because I want to get to excerpts from Silver Meadows and then show you something brand new before we go into our question and answer mode. And then, but this was a discovery. There was a book that I had. It was a simultaneous. It was a book that I did with a Japanese publisher, Super Labo, who had asked me to do something. And this is around the time when zines were zines were really popular. Well, they're of course are still very popular, but self-publishing came out and people could easily make things and print things well. And there was an explosion of people making really interesting little books. And I thought that, and all the things I'd done to that date were, there were these incredibly beautiful trade monographs that but I wanted to do something different with this. And I knew it would inform my other work. So I just kind of, put all these things that I had not done before together in this little book. And then this is like the dummy, but these are pictures of of different people, and I was influenced very much by pulp fiction, and then memories of my where I grew up and what we used to do, and so it sort of just it became this source of energy for my work. And then through that, I met a model named Christina, or Christiana is what her name is now. And she was somebody that was really amazing to me. It's sort of like she would be different in every picture. And we also had, more importantly, than she looked different, we had this really amazing rapport where we didn't even have to really talk, and we would make these scenarios and things. And then with this work, I also had the great luckiness of having hair and makeup people and having a stylist, and then having it be a little bit more of a production. And so, that was how she got her knee skin. There was our hair and makeup person, Heather Beckrest, had done a blood and gore workshop like the weekend before in Los Angeles, and she was like, "Hey, I can do this," and then I'm like, "Well, if Christina wants to do it, let's do it." And then so that's how that happened. But just kind of like playing with that. So that's one place that I do when it comes to portraiture. Unless you're Gary Winogrand walking down the street, just snapping your camera, there's an element of stagedness to portraits because the person knows you're taking their picture in there, and that once you break that candidness, then I think that it's fair game to stage portraits. So that's what I do that. And then so anyhow, flash forward to I think this was around 2012-ish. Anyhow, some really amazing collectors of mine, Fred and Laura Bidwell, were going to open a photo museum in Ohio, which was an incredibly novel and new idea at that point. And they had asked me to have the first solo exhibition there, and commissioned me to make work that was had something to do with that region of Ohio, or just like, there was something about like I was from Ohio, and that and that we would show it there, and that would have been my hometown museum had I it was, I grew up in that area. That was the museum. It was the Cleveland Museum of Art, which is part of Transformer Station. Was where we would go to as little kids, like on our tour bus to the museum. So anyway, so I started doing this projects, and there was one of the things that I was, I'm always been influenced by is Louis Baltz, and it's, this thing he says about photography is that it might be more useful, if not necessarily more true, to think of photography as a narrow, deep area between the novel and film. In my brain, I simplify that to like, photography is a profound corner that sits between literature and film. And that is something that really speaks to me. And I like that. And that's why I was talking about the limits of photography. I like them, and it's like, it doesn't talk, it doesn't move, and there's something about that, using that as your medium is, I think, really curious. So back to this picture again, this had to be in this because it was about Ohio. So I just kind of set out and I started making pictures there, and then all over. But I took many trips there to photograph, and I would do this, and I would go to art fairs and buy a bunch of books, and then I would come home and I would sequence my pictures on the table. And I show you this because like this is my dining room table, and like at one point, and my son would be like, "Oh, this is like R&D," the research department, and then the development department, which I thought was pretty clever of him to say. So anyhow, and this is kind of how I start to gather images and make pictures and make books. And so, and then there's something that you kind of need as a backstory to fill out that narrative, and then it's like there has to be like a purpose. Like, what are you putting the pictures together for? Or what are you trying to say? And then there was Robert Adams had this. There was a website. Yale University had a website that I looked at, and there was a quote of Robert Adams, and he was talking about Dorothea Lange, and he mentioned what exists and prevails. And then you can read this, but it was. Like she said, that a photographer should be interested in, concentrate on what exists and prevails. And that's perfect for documentary. And I really like that. And I really love that, like Robert Adams, like really did that incredibly well. If you like what exists and prevails in the area that he came from in the 60s, like his work is an epic on that. But I thought, like I've always sort of been like, I'm not a documentary photographer, but like, you still, but photography is it can tell stories, and I just thought, like I'll just make my work about what I think exists and prevails, and where I came from in my neighborhood of Silver Meadows Boulevard, which is what it was called, and so this is the cover of this book. And I also would use, like, that's my father, getting a certificate to sell life insurance. And that's not my cat, but I found that cat, and and then those are my feet and whatnot. And so so there's the fiction begins. And so the book just sort of starts out, with these sort of mood setting things. And then I'm not showing the whole book here because of the time, but you can see that, it kind of goes on. And that's a picture of my father. Actually, that is actually a selfie. Isn't that crazy? Like, he held the camera out as a teenager in like the 50s and developed that picture himself. And then it's very strange. Okay. This is Christiana. And then this is, I did these gatefolds in this book, and then they would open up and it would be as tall as two 10-year-olds. Those are my kids, Owen and Audrey. But that's excerpts from Silver Meadow. So there'd be gatefolds and they would open up, and you could really get into this, like the layers and layers here that I was trying of meaning. I was trying to sort of just infuse just purely from imagination, but also like something about like, what is that? There's a saying that I think Picasso said, that give an artist a mask and he'll tell you the truth. So, there's a lot of it is reality. Anyhow, Lake Erie, we would go there a lot, and I would go, and so this is me. I learned that my iPhone could track me, and I was like, what does that look like? And I'm like, whoa, that is really crazy. And like, this is ancient technology. Imagine what it can do now. But so I looked at this site that would show you where you've been, and that is me being super, super obsessed and going back to Ohio 4 or 5 times during that period to make these landscape pictures of Lake Erie, which is an important part of Northern Ohio. And so that's, that's me doing that. And then, other places too. But it's curious, that stuff. And then, this is a little part that sort of, that this house looks exactly like where I grew up, that kind of house, the same color and everything. And then there's actually, and some of this is, that's my father, and the newspaper Action is what Hido gives the fans. And then there's his like drunken keg graduation, holding my brother up also. Needless to say, this is the things that art is made of about, like 25 or 30 years later. And then this picture is devastating to me. It's just like such, like this is like the evidence of people not giving a crap about anything, about the environment where they are. Which that's what the apartments looks like on Denise Drive, or near Denise Drive. And then Christiana ends up being very important in this. And then also there's other people I've worked with, Andrea Margaret, and who had, after we started, taking pictures, she had a collapsed lung, and not after the pictures, before the pictures, but she had those marks on her. And I just, and she was very, I thought, brave to show that, and it was wonderful. I love that. And then, just more photographs. And then, but so you can see what's happening here. I think this is important for me, is that like, I'm taking that, like shooting from the car, and then turning it on to shooting a place, like a house. And then we move on, and then you'll see that's Christiana again. And then this is ironic. This is my first digital, like official digital photograph. As I remember being on a job, and we had to use a camera that was digital because we had to get the pictures quickly. And I remember like somebody was like, "You can shoot this at night." I'm like, "What? You can shoot at night, hand holding a camera?" Well, that is significant progress. And so that was a turning point for me. And it's amazing what's happened with digital photography these days. I currently have a Leica S3, which is amazing at night. And that's what I use currently. I've also used Nikon and Pentax. And then, so that is this work. Here's one of the installation shots. And then here's some of another one of my digital night shots. You know, again, holding it in your hand just opens the doors to everything. These are just some posters that the Transformer Station produced. And Bob Awfulnish, a graphic designer I work with, designed. And then this is the show. And then this is B-sides box sets, which I'll talk about at another lecture. And then it's interesting, like this is the same work, but all these different iterations of it, like those box sets are these little tiny things, as big as a baseball card. And then these are another exhibition at Pier 24, where, you know, they decided to put the 6 really large pictures into their smallest room. It was wonderful because you walk in and it's like it's claustrophobic, but there's only 6 pictures. It was a really, I thought, a beautiful installation. And then some of the portraits that I recently about a couple of years showed in Arles and also at the National Portrait Gallery. And then I always have this sense to mix things with, so like it's hard for me to just stick to one little thing. So, you know, in this room and for this exhibit, I, you know, would put these landscapes. There's something about landscapes and people that like, there's a person in a place. That's what I need a lot of times, a person and a place. And then we get to Bright Black World, which is the last book that I had published. And I'm just going to go through this quickly, and we can get to the questions. But one thing I just want to say is that, like, so in one major thing that happened in between that was Aperture published a book called Intimate Distance, and it was a mid-career survey of my work, and it was really an interesting thing. Like after I had done that, it was sort of like this thing. It's like, okay, well, I just kind of you know, summarized or put together, you know, with a little bit of a finish on work, and it felt and I was sort of like, I'm not going to just go and do exactly what I used to do. I mean, totally do a 180 or something, but what do I do next? You know, and I think that every artist that's had sort of a mid-career like survey of some kind understands that totally. And it's an odd and interesting point in your work. But what happened for me during that period was, remember I said I went to Marseille and I couldn't, you know, and I was like, and I didn't have, I just wasn't seeing it, like things there, and they weren't right for me. You know, and I kind of realized that it was like, well, because I was making work that was about where I came from. I was making work, and it sort of needed at that point in time needed to be back at home, and then and so I kept making. I would travel all over, but I wouldn't take pictures. I wouldn't make work that was something I'd share with you for years, and then finally I had this mid-career survey, and I sort of like, well, I don't need to make all my pictures don't have to be about where I came from. You know, and I sort of like, it was a super simple realization, but I realized it was like very important for me personally, because it sort of like dropped a albatross, you know, not that it's an albatross, like you want that, believe me, you want a reason to be making things that's inside of you. But sort of like there's a bit of clarity, you know, in time passing. And so I was able to, you know, think about other things. And then that's the same exact time that, you know, that the world's just started to take a darker turn. And so I was interested in making photographs of that. And this is what I've done. I don't know. and as Janie mentioned, I've, photographed in, Scandinavia, Norway, Iceland, North Sea of Japan, and Ohio and California and other places. But so it was interesting for me to be able to go somewhere else to make work, and come back with it. And it's weird how the tricks you play on your head plays on you, that tells you, it fences you in, and it's curious how, if you can remove those things out of your way, it's really curious what happens. And so this is that work. I love this one. This is curiously like close to where Robert Adams would take pictures in Denver, like 40 years later. And obviously, climate change is something that, I'm thinking about or looking at. And it's in, like, just the things that we're feeling and seeing are become a part of your work. And not directly, but I mean, indirectly. And of course, any artist that's not moved in some way about something in the last 4 years might need to get their pulse checked. Because this is a time when, there's a darkness that's been going on that's really, informing the pictures that I'm making. And ironically, I'm a happy person, as you can see. But, I let it out in my pictures. This is, I remember, one of the first times I ever saw the effects of a wildfire, like right after it happened. And this is in the Coffee Park neighborhood in Santa Rosa in California about 2 years ago. And I'll never forget going there and just seeing like just the utter devastation that those wildfires have. Like, it's frightening, very frightening. Okay, I have a couple more slides, and then this is what I've been working on next. And this title comes from Alexander Nemerov, who is an amazing art historian at Stanford, who I was very lucky to have write something for my book, Bright Black World. And this was the first sentence that he wrote in the piece of writing that he did to go with my book. And it just, when I read it the first time, it struck me so much. And I'd asked him, I said, can I use that as a title at some point? And he's like, yeah, I would be happy for that. And so that's what I was, working on. So like, this is like literally not a translation, like, but this is just the pictures I've been taking. They're just sort of like further. It's really like those other ones. I would not even put them in right now. I love them, but I wouldn't. But this is more like, what I'm sort of thinking of. And it's interesting as an artist, like iterations. It's like you're iterating all the time, but like change is one thing, but iteration is really an amazing zone for artists to work in, which is small, little, tiny changes. And that's sort of what you can sort of hope for, I think. And that, at least that's what I hope for. And then if they become, over years, they grow into changes. And then sometimes there's also like things I took this picture, a while ago, but then as you change and what you're looking at changes, you go into your work and look at other things. And then here's another one. And this is one that I took, actually was one of the last pictures that I had done right before the pandemic happened. I was in Deauville, France, doing a commission for a photo festival there that happened, which I, of course, did not get to go to. But I was able to, at least I made my work. I print my work at home. We were able to send it there. They were able to put it on the walls, all from my studio. So that was really lucky that I was, I remember coming home on the freeway there, and it was like, tune your radio to 107.7 for COVID info. And we were like, what is that? But anyway, but this was the picture I made right before I left. And I love this picture. I think it's really, I don't know, there's something, one of the things I did during COVID is I built a bird bath outside of my window, and it's one of my favorite things. And I love looking at birds these days. But this picture's, I really like it. And then this is the very last picture that I made a few weeks ago. What I've been trying to do is, like, obviously it's been difficult to go and travel places, but I've always, from the very beginning, I thought about, well, cars like a spaceship, and then houses are like space shuttles. And if you can, go in between them. And so basically, so like have tried to get out in my car to take pictures, and it works, very well for me, that I've been able to, like, taking pictures through windows for a very long time. So it was not, didn't cramp my style. So anyway, that's all I have to say for now. And then we're going to do the question and answer. But thank you. And I'm sorry that was longer than we had talked about, but hopefully it was.
That was just amazing, Todd. And it was really fun to see all the comments coming in from all around the world, and so many students here watching. That's really great. So I am kind of scrolling through the questions, and there's like 78 questions. So I'm just going to try to put some of these together. I mean, the one that got the most votes was, where do you take inspiration from when there's a creative block? And it seems to me that you've talked a lot about that. You've talked about how you work very intuitively, going from project to project.
And so when and everybody has creative blocks, and I think, but what I do is, well, first of all, when I don't have that feeling, I look at books, and that's probably why I have so many books. Like, books to me, like, they're just like a resource, and that's why I really want them to be, like, at my, fingertips or in my house, and so I can go and look at it right now. Of course we can look up things on the internet, but, like, I like to find the real thing, like the place I first discovered. Because if you think about most of the photographs you've seen, other than on the internet, most of the photographs you've seen in the world are from books. And then the internet came along and changed that very much. But I think what it did was it made the book more important and more special. And then another thing that I try to do, and then I like everyone else. I mean, every photographer knows this feeling in their stomach of going out and shooting, and you're not seeing anything you like. And then, and then if you like traveled somewhere to take the picture, and that's why you were there, and you're not feeling it, or it's not happening, or it's like even a worse feeling. But, like, we all have that feeling sometimes, and I am not excluded from that crowd at all. But I think that as I go on, I just, like, I pay attention to what works for me. Like, one thing, like, I know that, like, right now I'm looking out my window. It's absolutely crystal clear weather here, sunny as could be in the middle of the day. Not interested in going out to take pictures at all. If, for those of you on the East Coast that are snowed in or still or whatever, I would be out taking pictures the whole time. I know that that's what works for me, and then I also know that, like I always do portraits, like, in the Bay Area, but and almost never out on the road, unless it's for a workshop or something. But because if I've traveled, I want to experience the place that I went to, because that's why I went there. And so I just trying to, like, shoot Where I
I
know.
know.
Uh-oh, are you hearing that weird echo? Oh, I think it's going away. Okay. And then I shoot where I know, and I try to pay attention to the things that work, and I don't try to go out and beat a dead fish, I guess I would say, and shooting on a sunny day.
Yeah. So do you have, I mean, one of the questions, and again, this has gone into some of the things that you've already said, but do you have preconceptions when you go out, or are you just going out and looking and finding, what's there and reacting to what's there?
But I have some preconceptions. Like a lot of times, what I do is because like that the work I was that was about Ohio, like because I couldn't go to Ohio all the time because it's halfway across the country. But I found a place called in Washington State, Spokane, which is really very much like Ohio. And then when you go out into the landscape of that area, like the farmland, it's Ohio 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I used to live there. And so it's kind of like this surrogate place. So I have, of course, when I go somewhere that's that specific, of course, I have preconceived notions that I'm going to go and photograph landscapes. But when I go there, I don't know exactly what I'll find. I'll just drive around. But I do this thing that happens is I sometimes go to the same places because it's like, if you were panning for gold and you struck gold somewhere in a creek or whatever, you wouldn't pick up your stuff and be like, I got it, let's go somewhere else. You would work that vein, and you would, just like mining. I mean, when you find it, it's sometimes what you're looking for is right next to the thing you already found. And so that creates some preconceived expectations. But I try to be as open as I can. And then I also, of course, I have this, try not, you don't want to repeat yourself. But I'm not, you don't have to show every picture you take, of course. And it's important to remember that when you're shooting, because then you can shoot anything and then you just don't have to show it if it's not something that works for you,
Okay. So 2 questions that are sort of related to that. Has anyone ever gotten mad at you when you were photographing their house at night? Have you?
Yeah, on occasion, people will come out and they'll ask me what I'm doing. But that doesn't happen very often. If they're weirded out by, they maybe turn their light off, and then that's what I was interested in. But that's what I said. I always try to like keep a distance, so I'm not that close. And then to their house. And then also sometimes people will call the police, and then the police come and they check my driver's license, and I'm not a criminal. So they say, okay, all right, have a nice night.
Yeah.
Because you're allowed to photograph in public, but yeah, I have had people yell at me, and then if somebody's, especially now, if anybody wants you to go, I'm out. I'm like, okay, no problem, bye bye.
A lot of people have asked questions about sort of related to the difficulties of photographing at night, and how is digital, working in digital format has changed what you're doing, because as you said, you suddenly found you can hand hold things at night.
Yeah. Well, how that's changed for me, and I have to say, like, just so you know, the people that are the analog fans, I was making color C prints, and probably one of the last people in the Bay Area to be actually making these C prints, at a lab before they closed. And then around that time, I had learned about, drum scans, and, I had, and I started to drum scan something, because I wasn't super happy with some of the things I'd done with other scanners, but like all technology, it improves. And so I first got my taste of digital printing through having drum scans, and then I would print them. And that was really incredible. And I have to say that worked really well. And then when I started doing digital photography more, I would just, like, anytime I switch cameras or make a shift into something else, I always take both with me. and I would, I would shoot things with film and with my digital camera.
Mhm.
And I would, and then just kind of gradually, that digital camera ended up becoming better than what I was using before with the film. And there's qualities to film that I really love, but there's a breadth of possibility with a digital camera, depending on what it is. And that's the whole thing. It depends on what it is, because, until about probably 2012, I mean, I haven't even been using digital cameras for 10 years. Let's put it that way. Because it kind of took, I needed, we talked about me making work that had, but putting in these piles of pictures, like I'm making this archive, like landscapes, houses at night, interiors, whatnot. I didn't, like, when your camera changes drastically, I didn't want to change drastically. I wanted it to look just like I had made it with other pictures. When I was able to make pictures with a digital camera that looked like my analog pictures looked, that's when I was like, okay, we're somewhere here, and I'm going to explore this, and it's worked very well. And I really like all the Bright Black World work. Everything in there is digital, so it's something that, and then ultimately at the end of the day, it gets to be something you don't want to have to think about that, because I'm kind of like, I'm that place with my new Leica camera that's like, I don't think about it at all anymore. I just take pictures, which is what it used to be for 20 years with my Pentax 6x7 with Kodak in it.
Okay, so this is a question I really like. Do you play any specific music when you shoot to get into a mood when you're driving around?
For me, it's actually, it's when I do the editing, or when I'm back looking at photographs, or like, even back when I would, like look at contact sheets with a loop, for hours and hours, and then or looking at pictures on the computer, I would, I listen to music then. But ironically, when I go out and photograph, I like talk radio. It's funny, all the things because also a lot of times, the music, you have an AM radio and that's all that comes in sometimes. So that's what I there's something about, and maybe it's because I'm often by myself, not always, but a lot of the driving around I've done has been alone, and I just listen to talk radio.
Okay, so someone asked that they're very curious to know what the experience of photographing Twin Peaks locations was like for you as an artist and as a David Lynch fan.
Yeah, that was really interesting. That was, of course, one of those assignments that you're like, oh my God, this is for real. I actually, like, somebody wants to have me go into North Bend, North Bend, Washington, which is around where they filmed Twin Peaks, because it was for, I guess that there was a new the second series, like the most recent one, had come out, and Time magazine sent me just to see, well, what was the real Twin Peaks like, the actual places they had filmed. And so that was an amazing assignment, and I every second of that was like, I loved it. I even had cherry pie and all that, and it was, but I made, this picture, and so we talked about preconceived notions. Like, did I know I was going to find this? No. Did I know I would be at this hotel during the day and then go back at night, and then it was going to start raining and be the perfect background? No. These are things that I like, if I could have thought it all up to be perfect, this is what would have happened. But it just, if you have preconceived notions, sometimes I find that I'm disappointed, and it's better to not have ideas about what you want, but you just, and that makes, when you find it like this, this is one of those times, like, when you're taking a picture, I was like, oh my God, this is perfect, So that's what that, that's how that came about. But yeah, that was a really wonderful assignment.
Yeah. Do you look at your pictures of houses as kind of the houses in light? Do you think of them as portraits in a way?
I do very much. Let me flip back to some of the, I feel like that's kind of what I sort of see them as, because they're really about like, they're about my computer. Okay. They're about these places that people live, and like, it's just it's an exterior thing. I realize that like surfaces are, look, my computer doesn't like this. I'll just go back to a couple, but so anyway, so I do see them as like portraits in a way, because they're really very much about, I mean, for me, you know, stories of people. And when we have, sorry, oh my gosh, we're almost there.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about like you know, there's a diversity there, in the same thing you see within a family and families. And you know, there's a story in every one of them. And the thing that's the most interesting is I always say that the meaning of the work resides in the viewer. And I feel like what ends up happening then is then, you know, the people looking at these, or you know, us looking at this, like, you know, we're not having this, we're you know, nobody knows what each other's thinking right now, and but you're making a little narrative in your head of some kind, probably. And that's where that portrait part kind of comes out too.
I have a question here from Eleanor Carucci, fellow photographer, who is actually going to be speaking a month from today with
Excellent.
us. And she's thanks you for your wonderful presentation, and your images are so beautiful. My question is about the women you photographed. Who are the women in your portraits? I know one was a professional model. You talked about her, but the others, can you talk about your collaboration with them?
Yes, yeah. The people that I work with they're almost always somebody that I know, or that I've met. I've met people through taking pictures, like the model Christiana that's been in a lot of my work. We've worked together for like over 10 years now, and we always do these shoots, and then there's something like, so I met her, you know, through taking pictures. And then there's some other people that I've worked with that are friends. And then there's a period of time when I was like, you know, starting to do portraits, and I needed to do more. I would find models on the internet, and there's like different platforms for, you know, it's usually like for fashion photography, and there's hair and makeup people. But what's interesting is that, you know, a lot of people that work like that, they really love actually being a model for art photographs, because there's something, and that, like Christina always says this to me, she always is, you know, says that, you know, like, you know, I like the work that I make with you is the most meaningful work that I do, because, you know, you allow me to be who I want to be. And I'm not, you know, trying to tell her to be somebody. I just let her be who she wants, and I take a picture or be a character, and we're truly collaborators on that. And along with other people that work with me, like the person that works with the wardrobe and the hair, and like it's not the same as like that I could do by myself. But that's how that works. And then but I find when I do find somebody that I work with well, like that last section of portraits there are like, I think there was like 8 or 9 pictures, like they were all the same person. And because we've discovered that wigs are good. And then also, as when you know somebody over a length of time, they change. And so the pics, they change a little bit. And so it's just, I like that magic of photography, that like, you know, there's an act of photography that's like playing dress up kind of, and that's something that I find is it works, you know, for making the pictures look like it's a more diverse set of people, but it's really just one person.
Well, I'm going to ask you one last question.
Okay.
And that is, what are you doing now? I mean, I know from speaking with you a few weeks ago that you were doing some limited traveling. Are you working close to home, or are you going
Yeah,
further?
well, like there's a couple of things I spent a long time just sort of working with my pictures. Fortunately, like last year, I got to, I got to go to France, I got to go to Alaska and North Dakota all before the pandemic hit. And it was going to be this scary year of traveling. I was actually a little bit worried about how much I had coming up. And so when the plug was pulled and you couldn't go anywhere, I was sort of excited about that, actually. And I worked at home a lot. And then as as this went into the summer, it was just becoming grueling. And I've also been extremely careful too, about being safe and whatnot. And so but then I realized that, like, just I had to go and do something. It had been too long. And organizing your work, thinking about your work, like, at a certain point, you got to like go and take pictures. And so I've gone on road trips, and is what I've done. And I basically, in the fall, I had a job for Vogue, and they had asked me to shoot something in Nashville, and it was before that bombing happened, and but it was right after the election, and it was, and then I didn't want to fly, I wanted to drive, and they were totally cool and let me do that, and so I got to drive to Nashville in the middle of this, and it worked really well, and I have to say that, like, just like, I was just very careful with what I did, and I got tested when I came back home, and 2 times, to make sure. And then, even though that's not even really, for sure, but anyway, bottom line is, it worked. And so then I did that after the holidays for a week, driving instead of flying to Washington State, I drove to Washington State, which was totally awesome. And like, I love doing that. And that's what I'm going to be doing, is just, driving and going out to shoot. And then, luckily I live in the West, and there's a lot of things to take pictures. And I'm also very happy that it's wintertime. All those storms that came through, like, I was out making pictures when that was happening. So that's what I'm doing, basically.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you for a fantastic talk. This was so amazing. And thank you to all of you who attended from around the world. Thank you to my colleague, Dan Solberg, who is making all of this work behind the scenes. I know a lot of you have been asking questions about sharing the lecture. You'll get a follow-up email, everybody who registered. So we're going to call this the end for now.
Okay. Thank you very much to everybody, and I appreciate your time.
Okay.
All right. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks, Todd.
Bye-bye.
Bye.